Getting started with models can take a little bit of thought process. I mean, one of them right off the bat that is, can be a little difficult is understanding that we have a two-dimensional drawing. It has no height property to it. We really can't, sort of see that. We have to just sort of envision that there's a third dimension there and that the pieces have a depth. I see this shield as not being flat. It is, sort of more of a cone shape in the way it's been designed. You can see highlights coming on one side, shadows on the other, and whatnot. So it's more of a cone shape. Obviously, this has a lot of shape to it. The other thing that I'll note that a lot of people do wrong, and that is try making everything out of one impossible, polygon soup, I call it, where they try and model something like this by extruding every piece out of other pieces. That is just a ridiculous way to model. There's absolutely no good reason to do so. Where there's separate pieces in reality, we should stick with separate pieces. So this blade is a separate piece. Even this piece on the end here, you can see it's riveted on. That's a separate piece. Handle's a separate piece. All the little tiny, sort of call it, I guess, bolt heads or whatever, are separate pieces. This is a separate piece. These are separate pieces. The strapping around the handle, right, the wrap, and this gold piece or brass piece or whatever, they're all separate pieces, and it becomes really easy to model things when you start seeing things as separate. The other issue that I generally see is that everyone wants to try and build everything high res from the get go. That's just not a good plan either. It's not a good way to go about it. And, it actually makes it much slower. It doesn't sort of like, hey, I'll skip to the last step first. It's not a good way to do it. So something like this, for instance, I'm going to start with a plane and I'm going to drop a plane into the scene. And, this is going to be the blade for the main weapons. So I'm going to call this the, attack or whatever it is. Yeah, I don't know what the name of it is. I called it there. I forget what I called them. I don't know if I gave them names. Anyways, I'm going to make this see-through to start with, just Alt X just to go to see-through. And I'm going to hit F4 to see all my wireframes, so I can see that, what the wire looks like. And that's way too many polygons. I'm going to take this down to 101 so there's none in there. Then I'm going to convert it down to an editable poly. I don't want all those things. They're going to be a pain in the butt. What I can then do is take this and drop it to the corners and set it to the corners about where they're going to be. So this is going to get set into this handle, I'm assuming, is kind of how it's probably a groove in that handle. You can see that it's set into. And so there you go. All I need to do now is go and do a swift loop, which is going to be Alt 1, and drop that in the middle. I'm holding down Shift to do that and move it over. So I'm going to not even worry about this little cutout here. Just don't worry about those little detail pieces. So I've added that now. Come to the edge here and to wherever I think the edge probably lands there. I'm going to go Alt 1 again. This time I'm going to hold down Shift again and watch. Look, it drops the edge loop almost right into where I want. So the holding down Shift in the Swift loop, and it's pretty much nailing it exactly where I want it to be. What's amazing now is if I go and do that again, every single one of them is going to fall right into place. Because I've started with this very sort of, simple shape and form, it's made it really easy for me to model and upres. But I'm not going to bother right away. I am going to try and get a little bit of thickness going. So this part of the blade here is thick, it then goes down to a sharp edge. So I'm going to drop another swift loop along that line, okay? And if it's not following that line perfectly everywhere it's supposed to be, I'm just going to go and correct that now before I do anything else. Looks like it's pretty good there and there somewhere. And then all of this part here, so these polygons, 4 on the keyboard, control double click to get your sort of edge loop of polygons. I can then move those straight up and give it some thickness. So this blade's got that touch of thickness. Now let's symmetry this so we've got both sides. I'm going to turn off my sub-object level. I'd make sure you do that or else symmetry will try and symmetry around your selection. We don't want to, we want it symmetrying around the object itself. So we're going to hit symmetry. It's going to drop it on the other side. Looks like default settings are going to work perfectly for us. So there it is, the thickness of the blade. So I'm going to drop back down to the base of model of the edible poly. And again, we're not going to be using turbo smooths on here. 2 on the keyboard and grab this back edge because we need to fill this in. And in fact, we're actually going to have to fill that edge in and that edge in. So we may as well do them all at once. And I'm just going to pull that down. Okay, so really it doesn't matter where. I could pull it up because I'm modeling flat on the ground here. All I got to do is zero out my Z axis, and guess what? It's built that back edge for us. So if I show end result now with Alt tilde, there's my it's complete so far. Now I'm going to have these little, triangles on the ends here. I'm going to have to fill in, and I could do that now if I want, or I could do it later. It really wouldn't matter, but we do it now. I'm going to go to 4 on the keyboard, so back to polygon, and then I'm going to skip over to my ribbon and use create. And I'm going to create a triangle just by clicking through those and right click to end. Okay, and that's going to create me my polygon there. You want to do that in counterclockwise order. So there it is filled in there. And of course, because we have symmetry on, it's symmetried it to the other side and it fits perfectly. Now we could go on with this and model this further, but I'm going to suggest don't. We've roughed it in. It's about the right shape, about the right size. We should move on to other parts of the model to ensure that we're sort of building everything that fits together before we start trying to detail pieces. And that's the trick, is making sure you're not getting ahead of yourself, and sort of spending all your time on a blade and then forgetting about all of the other elements that we have, because we have, in this case, 3 weapons to deal with. So I'm going to move on to the handle and rough that in, and I'm going to rough that in with a spline. So I just control right clicked, or you can go find it over here. I'm going to just close the rendering. I'm going to say smooth and smooth for the knot types, and I'm going to draw that down through the handle, probably something like that to get going. Just go to my knots with 1 on the keyboard, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to get through your sub-object levels. And I'm going to pick something like this. And we can then go about either just turning on in renderer, or we can use a sweep modifier. And so I'm going to use a sweep modifier anyway. So I'm going to go and press X and choose sweep. And add the sweep modifier in here. So again, Alt X just to see through, so I can see through to everything. There's way too many polygons in this. Now the steps are generally up here at 6. It looks like I was using it already today and didn't restart Max, so it was remembering that. So that's way too many polygons. We want super low. So I'm going to take the steps and sweep down to 1. So I've got very few around this way. Way too many along the length. I'm going to take those down. Just going to show end result again with the Alt tilde, or you can press the show end result button. And I'm going to take the rendering down, and I'm going to go to interpolation, and I'm going to pull the interpolation right down so it's nice and low. We want it nice and low. Like, we just don't want to have anything else to deal with, because it's going to be a pain for us to model lots of polygons. We don't want to be doing that. Now, it looks like my handle is a lot thinner overall, so I'm going to go back to the parameters of the sweep, and I'm just going to take my down to more of the thickness. I'm not going to worry about this end. That can get modeled out really easily. That's looking pretty good. We want to be able to only model the top half of this. We don't, if the other side's going to be exactly the same, then we want to be able to have that done automatically for it. That would be with symmetry modifier. And the symmetry modifier will cut the model in half for us. But frankly, I don't like doing that in the symmetry modifier. Okay, I prefer going and purposefully slicing it in half. So I'm going to add a slice plane modifier. And so it adds this slice plane to the model. And then I can say remove positive or remove negative, and remove the side I don't want. Okay, so I'm going to do it this way because in my opinion, I don't like the slicing and the problems that can arise if if you do it wrong. How's that? So now that I've done this, and I really, I could start poly modeling with an edit poly modifier. At this point, I really should just collapse it down to an edit poly, because an edit poly modifier is not procedural, and it's not going to help you if it's if you've done a bunch of work and you decide to go back and change a procedural one below a non-procedural modifier. It's just going to blow your model up. So collapsed it down. Again, symmetry. So symmetry can be added to that. Perfect. We've got our model back together again. And there's that slice along mirror plane. I don't like this option at all. I find it can make quite a mess of things at times if you're not paying attention to what it's doing. So now what we can do is we can go about tweaking this model out a little bit. Now we can do it a couple of ways. One, we can again go to the bottom of the stack. I've hotkeyed that with a Shift 1, but that's not a default hotkey. We can just go about pulling verts out and messing with this. And you can see here you go. Here's the slice along mirror plane making some crazy, or the slice plane looks like it did some crazy vertices here. So I'm going to go in and clean these up to begin with. So it looks like it's done that in quite a few places for some reason. And that is actually the slice that's done that. So we need to remove those. So that's going to be Control Backspace to get rid of those. Let's go in and sure. So this is one of those problems that can happen in the symmetry modifier. And because you don't sort of pay attention to it in there, it can cause you all kinds of grief. So I've got all these extra. Control Backspace, get rid of those extra verts. There we go. They're gone now. Perfect. Okay, so now we can go about, pulling some of this out and creating these shapes that we have. And it looks like I've actually even got ones that are right there, which is not good. So make sure you're fixing your meshes if you have those issues coming up. But we're not pulling all of them to get that nice round shape here. We'd have to pull this one. We'd have to pull this one. So another way to go about doing this is with a freeform modeling tools, Shift Brush, open up the settings for it. Okay, which fly this thing will fly. I dock them. They'll be flying on the screen somewhere. We're looking down in Z here. I'm going to freeze Z so I can't move it up and down. I can only move it sideways. And now I can just use this brush to be able to sort of mash some of these shapes around. Now you'll notice I can't move that bottom one because there's no cut line going down here. So right click, cut, or you could go into modeling, cut, and I'm going to cut from here down to here. So, and right click to end. And now I have another vertex there. I can start pulling that out and start looking at sort of the shape and form of this, as a whole, and making sure I'm looking around it from all angles. So that's starting to look about right. I might want to think about, well, should some of this be a little thinner, in spots? Maybe I want to grab some of these and pull them down so we've got some variation in the shape and form. And do I need anything going at the other end? Well, maybe that cut line again. And so I'm going to cut that back in there again. And, we can try and pull that up, go to the top view. And yeah, it looks like I'm not quite on the end of this. So I'm just going to pull that up for now and flare it out a bit. I think it wants to be like that or something. So that's good enough for now. I don't need to do any more to it at this point. This should be good enough. So there's that shape. I'm just going to go set that to be gray color and get out a sub-object. And same thing, I'm going to show that. Just make that to be a gray color. Perfect things is gray colors. And so then I can think about some of the other basic shapes that I might need on this to get started. Okay. So that's going to be this piece down here. Now that's actually a really easy piece to make. So I'm going to go to my top view and I'm going to go in and make a box for this. And I'm going to make it from the top to the bottom about the right length. And it's going to have a bit of thickness to it. Okay, so this has got a little bit of height going in it. Something like that. It's got to sit on top of here, right? So we're going to have to try and move that up into that height. So the easiest way to do that is use the select and place tool. So I'm going to click select and place, grab my box, and I'm just going to move it up on top. and kind of hit that midpoint somewhere of that. And top view again. And so I'm going to move that over, and with that select in place, it'll actually try and stick to surfaces. So I'm going to drop that right about there. I'm going to give it a few segments this way along here. So we need to know which one that is. So not that one and that one. So just about that many. Right now, not many at all. And then I'm going to use a bend modifier. Why try and bend it by hand when I can just simply turn up my bend angle? Okay, yeah, it's not doing what you want, but just leave the bend angle up right now and get it to go on the right angle. So in this case, Y is doing it. We may have to change the angle, the direction to 90. But it's really easy now to bend this and get it most of the way. You know, we could rotate it a bit. Got angle snap turned off, turned on. I'll just hit A on the keyboard to get rid of that. And you can see now I can model that in place. I'm going to hide this one. It's the blade. It's getting in my way right now. We know we're on top of it. And so I can see the box is starting to fit what I'm after. So I can just leave that there for now. It's good enough. We're probably going to want to delete these back faces. We won't need them. We're probably going to want to symmetry it over onto the other side. We could do that now if you want. So I can symmetry it. But do I really need to? I think I'll just leave it till later at this point. It's kind of close to what I'm after. It's getting close. Name it or whatever else. Let's think about this piece here. We'll do the same thing there. I'll go and build a box again. Rough this in, a little bit of thickness to it. And again, it's got to sit on top of the blade. So I'm going to go get my, blade and make that visible and just go and use my placement tool and just place it so it sits on top of it. And this one's going to take a little bit of rotation maybe. And then again, we're going to need to do a little bit of sort of manipulating it, probably the length of it. And you'll notice I'm using the spinners. I'm not scaling it. Don't scale your objects. You're going to ask for trouble. We don't need this many segments along it to get it close to begin with. Less. Beautiful. That's looking pretty good. It looks like my select in place wasn't putting it. There we go. For some reason, I wasn't on there. There we go. And that's pretty good. Too thick. I'm just going to go and take the height down. It needs to be a thin piece. And that one's going to go there, and it's going to require a little bit of, could be a bit of a bend, but this one we could easily manipulate pretty quickly. So let's just do that. Editable poly, and let's get rid of those back faces. We simply don't need them. 4 on the keyboard. Control double click, although it looks like it grabbed everything. I'll just grab that and that. Delete, and top view again. And now into the vertices, and we'll start modeling that over somewhere there. If you notice, I'm marquee selecting. That's because there's vertices on top of each other here. And I'm going to pull that over there somewhere. And that's going to be close enough for now. So that piece is done. I like setting them to gray again. I normally have a script that does all that. And 1 to get out of the sub-object. And let's take a look at these. And again, let's go and make that gray. And so that's pretty good. Let's move on to the next object and start looking at that next one now. This is close enough to start understanding scale and how they're going to look together. So now we want to move on, and we want to get the rest roughed in before we ever start to detail any one of them.